Now, going back in time to the 1700s, we get sort of a sense of some of the words that are going to come into Polari a bit later on. And this was based around a group of men called the Mollies, who were mainly based in London. And they were, they didn't call themselves gay men because the word gay wasn't invented in that way then. But they had sex with each other. They hung out in sort of taverns that were called molly houses. They used words like bitch. They called each other bitches and queens as well. And they referred to their sexual partners as trade. And they called each other by female names. And sometimes they dressed up as women. This was quite an uptight era in British history. And the Mollies got picked on quite a bit by moral campaigners. And there were raids of these taverns and they got put in prison. There was a very famous raid of Mother Clapp's Molly House around 1725, and 40 men got arrested, and 3 of them actually got hanged. So this was quite a dangerous time to be gay, really. And a lot of these men ended up in prison, and I think it explains why some of these men used words from what's called cant, which was a kind of criminal language at the time. So the Mollies used words like poll, which means wig, and mish, which is shirt, and stampers, which are shoes. We move a bit later on to the 19th century, and we have Polari not being used yet, but we have another kind of an older version called Polyary. And this is a slang used by beggars and sex workers and people who traveled in carnivals and fairgrounds and people who had market stalls. And they used it kind of like as a trade language, really. I've put a little example there of a conversation that a couple of people have in this Polyary, and basically they've been performing all day on the street, and now they're dividing up the takings at the end of the day between them both. Polyary has words for landlords and lodgings and traveling around and all the different kinds of entertainment trades that they had. And a lot of these Polyary words come from Italian. I don't know if any of you know Italian here, but Italians kind of came over to the UK in the 18th and 19th century. They worked as Punch and Judy shows, and we start to find Italian words coming into this language as well. Words like mangiare, for eat, for example. And around this time, we get words like bona, which means good, lati, which means house, and omi, which means man, coming into Polari. And there's also words for numbers as well, which I've put down on the right-hand side of this screen there as well. Then gradually, Polari starts to get into the music halls of the later 19th century. And we've got songs, I don't know if you know the song, The Daring Young Man and the Flying Trapeze, which is quite a famous one, still quite well known. And there's a line in that, this young man by name was Signor Bona Slang, which is Polari or Polyary. Bona means good. And slang here doesn't mean language, it refers to an artist's performance. So it means Mr. Good performance, basically, is Signor Bona Slang. Moving on to the 20th century, Polyary moves from the music halls and the fairgrounds, starts to being heard in theatres, and its use starts to get adopted by more and more gay men and some gay women as well. You start to hear it, especially in seaside resorts and coastal towns and places where there are ports like Portsmouth and Southampton. A good number of gay men signed up to work on cruise ships as waiters and stewards, and a lot of these men used Polari. They had their own slight different version of it. So they referred to the ship as a latte on water, which is literally a house on water. There was a lot of fun, a lot of drag, a lot of sex, I think, as well, when I interviewed. That picture there on the left is one of the parties. And then those two pictures on the right are some of the kind of drag performances they put on to entertain each other. Back on land, we found it being used a lot in the British theatres, especially with male dancers and chorus boys. A lot of those were gay. And also another group used it around Piccadilly Circus. And those were young men who sold their bodies for sex. And they had words for sex and money and for kind of using it as a trade language to talk about what different clients liked and how much to charge them. So gradually it gets circulated among gay men, and it's used as a kind of secret handshake sometimes. So if you thought somebody might be gay, you'd drop the odd word of Polari into your conversation, and then you'd see if they responded with another word, and then you'd know that you had something to talk about with them.